similar to this population increased.
What's the difference between post-reproductive cohorts are larger and then pre-reproductive ones are smaller? What's the difference?
Post-reproductive would be the ones that are no longer reproducing and will not do so again, so they're not really relevant to the experiment, at least relative to reproduction.
So
that's why we always ignore them up here, is because they're not reproducing anymore.
So old people.
Yeah, they're drawing Social Security, but they're not reproducing.
Old people don't matter. Got it.
So what exactly is a cohort? Is that?
It's just a group of people of a similar age.
Okay.
In human beings, they like to do it in steps of 5 years, as you can see from these graphs.
Okay.
In the little vermin we looked at earlier, it was by year, because they didn't live terribly long, so they did it by year. Is there any question in the back? No. Okay. All right. The trouble with this thing is I can't see on the other side of the thing. Too lazy to stand up. For 16, it talks about oaks. Okay, we did do this. A species of oak evolved in eastern North America. It also grows well in parts of China and Europe, but is not found there. The most likely explanation for its absence in China and Europe is of what type? That would be the species dispersal, which I have helpfully clarified to mean the history of dispersal of the species. In other words, it never had an opportunity to get there. As we'll see in a later chapter, this was one of the things that was the most striking to European scientists when they began to study living things from places like North America and China, was they were struck by the fact that species were not occupying their entire potential ranges. And that made sense if they had evolved and dispersed, but it didn't make sense otherwise. 17, we're not going to talk about that because we're just going to put that on the next test, although it will be the very first subject for the next test. 18 talks about modern biologists. They believe that bacteria, both bacteria and archaea, share a common ancestor with humans. We believe that all living things share a common ancestor. It's not that it's absolutely necessary that they do, as far as we know, but all the ones we've ever looked at do. Some of the high-powered technologies that are being applied to look for unknown organisms nowadays wouldn't find organisms that weren't closely related to the life we already understand. So we're kind of limiting ourselves a little bit right now in that one. 19, pre-industrial, sometimes called traditional societies, are we to use. Actually, we just call that the first zero population growth stage this time around. So this would be the very first zero population growth stage we talked about. We have lower population growth rates in societies just starting their industrial revolutions. And that is true, because remember we said that the Industrial Revolution is part of what kicks off the demographic transition, the time when death rates drop. And birth rates also drop, but more slowly. So we're basically talking about the zero population trend. I should say zero population growth. I did this little quick write-up in lecture, before lecture today, so that it would be more clear. So this is kind of your. There was a time when it was fashionable in the sciences to call this period the post-industrial and this the pre-industrial. By which standards the United States is a post-industrial society, which is confusing because it doesn't mean that societies have given up industry. It just means that they've fully adapted to it.
So does it mean that societies really grew after the Industrial Revolution, but then went back to zero growth?
But only for a time. It's
only for a limited time.
All the populations we've examined have altered their reproductive rates to match their death rates. It just seems to take 2 or 3 generations to happen. It can be sped up in some countries. Pre-industrial societies. Oh, I didn't know. Okay. So they have lower rates than next week. The surface layer of a shallow marine ecosystem will generally be less productive than the surface layer of a deep marine ecosystem. That statement is reversed because the shallow is the more productive mostly because nutrient levels are higher. The shallowness of the ecosystem prevents the nutrients from settling to the bottom and being lost. They keep getting recycled up to the surface. So this statement is actually exactly backwards. It's false. All traits that allow an organism to better survive and reproduce in its environment are said to be adaptive. And you certainly use that term now. In the far southern U.S., apple trees survive, grow, and make leaves, but fail to bloom. I use that as an example of how environmental factors can be a little more subtle than some of the major things we think about. And the reason is that they can also be signals. And in this case, the signal is cool temperatures. So they require cool temperatures to blossom. It's a mechanism to prevent them from blooming too early. But of course, it makes nonsense of when they're moved to new locations sometimes. 23 goes back to our R-selected species again. They are adapted to maximize their reproductive capacity. In other words, Rmax, their maximum possible reproductive capacity, or sometimes innate reproductive capacity, as it's sometimes called. But they're species that are in unstable environments, so there's no advantage to them to putting the brake on reproduction. They're not fighting much competition typically, so it's to their advantage to reproduce just as rapidly as possible. 24 says what type of population distribution would be expected if individuals are attracted to each other. Actually, you probably could think that one through without having even been in this class. It would make sense if they're attracted, they'll end up clumped. And that's the most common arrangement. Sometimes they're not so much attracted to each other as they are to a common resource, but it still ends up clumping. Big Rapids is in the temperate deciduous forest, which we are now calling the temperate broadleaf forest, but I think I could reasonably expect people to make the connection. I know I mentioned it when we talked about it in lecture 2. They're doing that because, remember, in Australia, in that forest, they're broadleaf trees, but they're evergreens, just to make things confusing. Eucalyptus trees. They have like hand bears or teddy bears or something. Oh yeah, that's right. That must be kind of dramatic. Right out of the course and see the wall. I wouldn't like that at all. 26. Which of these has no forest and occurs around the Arctic Circle? Definitely the tundra.
Oh, that's funny.
What was the taiga again?
Yeah.
That is the coniferous northern forest. Let's see what we call it this time. We do call it coniferous northern forest. Sometimes called the boreal forest. The trouble is they have different names in different locations, so then they have to decide what we're going to call it on a worldwide basis. A species population density increases exponentially until it greatly exceeds the carrying capacity. It then drops drastically and stabilizes at a lower level than the carrying capacity. That sounds like the work of an R-selected species. Rapid reproductive rate that causes it to overshoot so badly. K-selected species don't usually damage their environments as they're increasing population density.
What is K-selected species?
It just means that they're selected to reach their carrying capacity, K, and be stable. So they're basically adapted to a stable environment. Not going to overshoot and die out. Of course, everything's relative. And your book talks about how the elephant situation, that South African park would have gone badly if people hadn't intervened to put a cap on things. 28 is species population density increases exponentially. It's basically the same question. What is the correct term for the period when the population grows past the carrying capacity, followed by the term when the population density is dropping? So that is the overshoot, remember, and then the dieback. And again, the terms are kind of self-explanatory. Evolution is an emergent characteristic of the population. I know some people were having trouble with that when we first discussed it in chapter 1. Hopefully our discussion of populations has made it more clear. Populations are all the individuals of a species living in an area. We're discussing species as being reproductively isolated from other species. That's a modern definition of species. That makes the population the breeding pool to all intents and purposes. It's the limit of the individuals who might combine their genetic material. So it is also the unit of evolution. It's also the unit of evolution because unlike individuals, it can evolve. Individuals stay the same. Populations evolve as individuals die and are replaced by new groups of individuals that are different, although not necessarily very different. Science cannot directly address ethical questions. This is considered to be true. I say directly because, of course, it's often the case that there's useful information that scientists can provide. 31, species with the lowest population growth rates cannot increase their numbers rapidly enough to overpopulate their habitat. Of course, we've seen the example of the elephants that would have done that if they'd been allowed to follow their natural pattern. We had a discussion that suggests that human beings may cut it fairly close when our species reaches its maximum population density. So definitely even the slowest reproducing species do have the capacity to overpopulate their environments. And that was one of Darwin's key realizations. So the statement is false because it says they can't. Which of the following distributions is most rare? Definitely random, because that requires the species individuals to have no effect on each other whatsoever. And that's rare. Neither the book nor I were able to come up with any examples of random distributions that weren't just temporary situations. Situations where individuals had been randomly introduced into an area and that was still reflected in the distribution. But the assumption is that that area will eventually become more full of those. For example, the dandelions, they might start as randomly scattered patches, but they'll eventually fill the whole field if they have that time. And then they won't be random. Now we're talking about the oaks again, and it says areas in North America, China, and Europe where it could grow as a total group would be a component of which type of niche, not range. We talked about ranges, didn't we? That's what I thought. Okay, so that should be a potential range. Sometimes the niche is uses an equivalent term to include the range. Hopefully it was obvious what the answer was, because I haven't reread the previous edition to see if it uses a different approach, but I might have just phrased that wrong. Anyway, the potential is the full possible, and then the realized, remember, is the part that will actually happen. So those are the two that are relevant. 34, species population density increases exponentially. It's that same one that's overpopulating. Now it's asking the question, why would it stabilize below the carrying capacity? So we're talking about this situation where this is the original K. And stabilizing a new lower level for K. That's caused by environmental damage during the period of overpopulation, and that is K. Less and less happy with that answer. Third degree.